Hello, and welcome to another edition of our recycling podcast. Recycle, don't be a waster. Today we want to discuss the problem of contamination, which is, I suppose, it's really the being of the life of recycling companies and recyclers, whereby you go to a site to pick up cardboard boxes or glass bottles or aluminium cans. And what happens is the bin is actually full of just general rubbish, plastic bags, food waste, other stuff. And, this makes the entire recycling process very difficult, and downstream leads to terrible issues with entire truckloads having to be dumped as general waste. And even on the macro scale, Western countries traditionally were shipping their waste or their supposed recycling to Asian countries predominantly, mostly China, up to a couple of years ago. And the Chinese eventually said, this is actually not recycling at all. This is just complete junk. So that's what happens when things start. Snowball effect happens, and then it ends up with major issues. So I suppose what actually causes this issue to begin with, and I suppose I'm a big believer that people do what they are incentivized to do. People are rational beings, not always, not individually, but on the larger macro scale they are. And in large crowds, I do believe people do what they're incentivized to do. So I think there is an issue of wish cycling, that concept that people, just believe that if they put it in this bin, it will be recycled. That could be as simple as plastic bags in a commingle bin, or polystyrene, expanded polystyrene. People think, why shouldn't this be recycled? It should be, but don't think about the actual criteria as to what can go into that bin and what cannot. So there is an aspect of some people just want to do the right thing. There's a second aspect that people want to just don't care. So people will chuck anything for convenience. So there's a certain segment of society will just, of people, of course, everyone's on a spectrum, and some people will just, for convenience, if there's no space in their general waste bin, they'll just chuck that general waste into the recycling bin. So that's just a simple option. And of course, in a business environment, recycling bins are cheaper. For a domestic situation, a private residence, that doesn't really count, because, your bins are paid for through your rates or through the, your council taxes, etc. So that aspect of it doesn't really come into consideration. But I suppose people fundamentally are putting waste into recycling bins, for one of three reasons: wish cycling, hoping it gets recycled, a lack of actual logical information, saying what can go in the bin, and I think this probably is, there's from an honest perspective there. When you're putting stuff in the bin, might be the evening time, you might be walking down in the dark looking to put something in the bin, and it's not exactly the time when you're checking online or checking a piece of paper saying exactly what can be contained and what cannot be. So that's the second one. And then thirdly, I would say, is just people not caring and just throwing it in the bin because they can get away with it. And when I say they can get away with it, realistically, in a domestic collection system, well, the driver's not going to completely go through your bin and check everything that's in it. That clearly isn't plausible. It has to be quite a quick process. If it's clearly contaminated, the driver may reject it. But in a residential situation, they won't. And I think we've even seen this in some Sydney suburbs, in the last month or two in 2022, whereby trucks were being filmed in certain council areas, and the general waste truck was emptying the general waste and then just going and emptying the commingled bin also, and there was a lot of uproar about this. This could obviously be because, to some extent, residential collections do have a much higher level of contamination. And this is often due to, I suppose, a lot of people not caring, but B, if it is contaminated, it's not rejected. Due to the council contracts, which are quite a tender, they're very tight contracts, and in many regards, the waste or recycling company has to remove that waste. There's no real punishment. There's no carrot and stick system to make people, monitor what goes in those bins. And in many regards, it's an honesty system. So even if you dump complete junk in your commingled bin, it's very likely that in a residential pickup it will be removed. So there's a clear issue there whereby people are not being incentivized to put that extra effort in to do the right thing. So, this is a problem, and, what happens in the major scale? This obviously decreases overall recycling in the economy. It clearly makes recycling at all much tougher because it's intermingled with garbage. And thirdly, it probably makes it much less cost effective for the recyclers to do it, which will drive up the cost of recycling itself, make it more prohibitive, and probably make less people enter the market. So, those are the things. And then I suppose the question is, how can we decrease contamination? What can we do? And there have been examples, certainly internationally, and even, talking about that in Australia. Some of the examples have been, I've even seen it described as naming and shaming, whereby not just stopping at the truck would reject the bin. And obviously this would take a lot of real change in the terms and conditions that councils procure their waste and recycling services on. It would take a real change in that regard to be much more, the truck will reject contaminated bins. And is that something that councils want to happen? Is that something that residential areas want to happen? Because clearly there'll be a lot of complaints. Clearly that will slow down the process. And, I can imagine a lot of complaints will be heading up to council. And at the end of the day, the people who run councils tend to be, admittedly there's the professionals who work there, but there's also elected officials who like to get elected. So you run into the realities of the electoral cycle and party politics. So I know some countries have done a naming and shaming where theoretically the bin is rejected if it's contaminated, and a sticker or poster is placed on the bin saying bin contaminated, cannot be emptied. We've also had situations where people are suggesting see-through bins, like almost plastic see-through bins, so that the driver and passers-by can see what is exactly in the bin. Clearly, with that, there is, the practicalities of would that really show contamination is debatable, and there's a privacy issue. Do people want to be seeing, what's in your bin? It raises questions. Would people, if they were drinking, say, alcoholic drinks and felt a bit, maybe their neighbours would be judging them that they're drinking too much, would that create issues? And that, in theory, could that even decrease recycling? Would people even think, I'm not going to put all these bottles this weekend, I had a big night, I might put some of those bottles in the general waste bin just to protect my my ego or my reputation. So there are issues with that, and certainly privacy. Should other people be able to see stuff? It is a question. But I suppose fundamentally the options for reducing this contamination, they can be divided into maybe, let's say, three methods. The first one is education. More clear labelling, more clarity will clearly decrease that information gap and help people know exactly what goes in the bin. Different methods can be done to do that. Advertising, potentially simplification of stuff, but again, it's never going to reduce it completely. The second one is a policing system whereby the drivers will reject bins that are, have got clear contamination in them. The drivers will say no to certain items. And again, there are repercussions to that clearly unhappy people, clearly the council will get involved, and it would have to be a significant change in the terms and conditions of those procurement contracts arranging those services. And thirdly, I think you probably are looking at some format of, clarity, clearer bins, something along those lines. There might be some format of fining, and again, I don't think anybody wants to get into this system purely because of the logistics, the administration costs. Once you put in place these things, it becomes very difficult to do them. But, there is the reality in life that when people want to change things, through COVID, we've seen a lot of certainly nudging. There was certainly a bit stronger than nudging at many times. But when you have these sort of, I suppose even the seatbelt wearing, it was brought in, it's legal, you have to wear a seatbelt in a car in Australia. If you don't, I think you're fined, and I think you also get criminal charges. I'm not exactly sure of the repercussions, but it's not small. So to some extent, there may have to be down the line some format of, I don't know, some penalty. And I'm by no means promoting penalising people at their own homes for making honest mistakes. That's certainly not what we're talking about. But there has to be some method of of reducing that issue, and I think that has to be part of a bigger discussion. So you came to listen to a podcast about recycling, and you hear me calling for restrictions, which is the last thing we want to be doing. So I think we'll leave it there today. Once again, thanks, and recycle. Don't be a waster.